Beginnings in Silicon Valley. The soft glow of the California morning sun filtered through the panoramic windows of the co-working space, illuminating a vibrant mosaic of young dreamers lost in the hum of creation. Among the sea of laptops and caffeine-fueled ambition, Emily Carter stood out, not for her looks, which were unassumingly pretty, but for the unmistakable spark of determination in her eyes. At 28, Emily was already the co-founder of her own tech startup, a data analytics platform she and her business partner had spent months tirelessly building from scratch. Emily was a transplant, hailing from a modest Chicago suburb where opportunities seemed as distant as the Silicon Valley hills now shimmering beyond the glass. Moving to the West Coast to chase her startup dreams, she'd quickly learned that Silicon Valley was less a geographical location than an attitude. Assertive, hungry, relentless. The valley thrived on failure as much as success, and Emily was determined to make her mark. The chapter opens on a bustling Monday in the heart of Palo Alto. Emily navigates the open office dotted with beanbags and whiteboards, clutching a notebook brimming with hand-drawn graphs and annotated code. The air is electric, charged with nerves and possibility. Her team is preparing for a crucial pitch to a prominent venture capital firm. Emily's natural leadership quietly shines as she checks in on the developers, encourages the marketing intern about her new social campaign, and reviews the latest prototype with the design lead. Gone are the days when she feared sounding inexperienced. Now, her voice is thoughtful and decisive, shaped by the trials of early entrepreneurship. Her best friend and co-founder, Jessica Miller, arrives shortly after. Her presence marked by a dazzling confidence and quick-witted banter that's become legendary in the shared workspace. The two women built their friendship at Stanford, late-night hackathons turning into shared reruns of The Office, and philosophical debates about the future of tech over Thai takeout. Jessica, originally from San Diego, was Emily's first and fiercest supporter when Emily hesitated to leave her stable consulting job for the volatile startup world. The Silicon Valley ecosystem pulses around them. Elevator pitches overheard in line for cappuccinos, recruiters exchanging LinkedIn handles in the parking lot, chatter about the latest IPO and who's hiring from which unicorn. Flashes of anxiety mingle with inspiration as Emily recalls her earliest struggles, learning the jargon, surviving networking events, feeling like an imposter next to software prodigies and serial entrepreneurs. But in this chapter, we see Emily at a turning point. While she still feels pressure, she's grown into her ambition, inspired by stories of other female founders who've broken ground in male-dominated spaces. A brief flashback shows her mother's encouraging words from years ago. "Don't wait for permission. Create your own seat at the table." Emily's value-driven approach, insisting on ethical data practices and a supportive team culture, sets her startup apart in a landscape too often driven by ruthless scale. She notices both the open possibilities and the undercurrents of rivalry swirling beneath the valley's polished surface. The chapter closes with Emily and Jessica sharing a private moment on the rooftop deck as the day fades, their laughter echoing over the Palo Alto skyline. The city lights begin to glow, hinting at the adventure and challenges that Silicon Valley holds for them. Emily feels the distinct thrill of new beginnings, unaware that the path before her will soon test every conviction she holds, starting not with a competitor, but with the one person she trusts most. Friendship and ambition. Long before venture capitalists and product launches, it was the simple spark of a college encounter that set Emily Carter and Jessica Miller on their shared journey. At Stanford, amid the restless drive of innovation and possibility, Emily and Jessica gravitated toward each other through a mix of happenstance and shared curiosity. A chance partnering in a data visualization course first sparked their friendship, but it flourished in the relentless rhythm of all-nighters and caffeine overdoses that defined their undergraduate years. Despite stark differences in background, Emily's modest Midwestern upbringing and Jessica's sun-soaked life in San Diego, they found common ground in their passion for technology and the unwavering belief that women belonged at the head of the table. not just in the room. Late nights were spent huddled in the residence hall lounge, laptops between them, dreams sprawling out on sticky notes and Google Docs. These weren't mere ambitions whispered in the dark. They were blueprints for the future. The pair challenged each other constantly, refining ideas until they gleamed, pushing past self-doubt, learning to argue and to apologize, to be fiercely loyal but also candidly critical. Their college bond matured into adulthood with no loss of intensity. After graduation, while their peers scattered into big-name companies or prestigious graduate programs, Emily and Jessica made the tougher choice, forging ahead as co-founders. From the beginning, their partnership blurred the lines between friendship and business, twining trust, laughter, and ambition into something unshakable. When one stumbled under pressure, a pitch gone poorly or a prototype collapse, the other would rally, bringing takeout and encouragement, reminding her why they started. Their ambitions weren't just personal. They dreamed of building something that would matter, to prove that two women, with drive and integrity, could disrupt a field still dominated by men in Patagonia vests. They wanted not only to succeed, but to inspire, to open doors for others after them. Together, they drafted their first product roadmap on a whiteboard in Jessica's cramped apartment, surrounded by pizza boxes, sticky notes, and the buzz of cheap fluorescent lights. They stayed up till sunrise arguing over feature sets, bracing themselves for every possible pitfall, imagining not just a company, but a movement. Soon, those dreams met the hard realities of the startup world. The duo faced endless late nights, side hustles to pay rent, and the constant dance of charm and calculation required to secure their first angel investor. When investors questioned their readiness or subtly undermined their leadership, they learned to present a united front, each sharpening the other's resolve. The line between personal and professional blurred further. Birthdays became working sessions. Arguments in the office sometimes spilled into tearful reconciliations over burritos at midnight. But these trials only deepened their trust, forging a bond few could understand. Emily and Jessica each brought something vital to the partnership. Emily's analytical rigor balanced Jessica's creative energy. Jessica's networking prowess opened doors, while Emily's steady hand kept projects on course. Together, they learned that ambition wasn't destructive. It was the glue that held them together through Silicon Valley's relentless churn and the anxiety that came with risking it all. By the end of that first grueling year, the two women had built more than a promising startup. They had created a code of loyalty, an understanding that neither would leave the other behind. Sitting side by side on a battered couch, reviewing their business plan one more time before the first big pitch, Emily turned to Jessica and whispered, "No matter what happens, we do this together. Deal?" Jessica grinned back, fist bumping her co-founder. It was more than a promise. It was the compass guiding them forward, into all the uncertainty and promise the valley had to offer. Little did they realize, their greatest test was yet to come. The defining idea. The air in the office was thick with anticipation as the team huddled around whiteboards and laptops, eyes flickering between lines of code and shifting market data. But amid the collective buzz, Emily Carter found herself in a rare moment of solitude, tucked away in a quiet corner, notebook open, lost in a mental maze of product features and customer feedback. It was during these solitary brainstorming sessions that Emily often struck gold, and this morning was no exception. For weeks, their startup had been grappling with the challenge of setting itself apart in a saturated tech landscape. Every competitor seemed to offer similar analytics tools, and Emily's nights were haunted by anxieties of becoming just another forgotten app. But this day, fueled by too much coffee and the restless urge to innovate, inspiration finally struck. The idea came together, not all at once, but as a flurry of insights and careful questions. Emily's pen moved with increasing urgency, sketching diagrams and jotting down the core concepts. A bold new way to visualize and personalize data for users, powered by predictive algorithms that no rival had implemented. By noon, the pages of her notebook were filled with interconnected modules and notations, the DNA of what could become their next big leap. Her heart pounded with the familiar thrill of discovery, but also with anxiety. Groundbreaking ideas in Silicon Valley were treasures, but they were also targets. Still, Emily couldn't keep her excitement to herself. She found Jessica across the office, chatting with a group of developers, her energy as magnetic as ever. Emily waited for a natural break, then confided, "Jess, I think I've cracked it. Can we talk?" "Just us?" Jessica saw the fervor in Emily's eyes and steered them to the conference room, closing the glass door behind them. Inside, Emily unfolded her vision with breathless clarity. She described not just the features, but the breakthrough behind them, the algorithmic twist, the user-centric dashboards, the applications in fields nobody in their space had yet dreamed of. Jessica listened patiently, asking sharp questions and pushing for details where Emily's ideas were rawest. They huddled over the sketches, rearranging sticky notes, imagining what their platform could look like 6 months or even a year from now. Jessica was nothing but encouraging. She urged Emily to document everything thoroughly and talk through each step. "You have to pitch this at the next exec meeting. This is the edge we need," she said, her voice brimming with conviction. For Emily, this was affirmation, proof that even in the cutthroat world of startups, trust between co-founders still mattered. In the days that followed, the idea grew from sketch to proto-design. Emily worked late into the night, refining technical specs and compiling user stories. Jessica, with her natural social finesse, began priming key team members, designers, engineers, even the marketing intern, about the upcoming breakthrough. They talked about how to present the innovation, how to position it before investors, and where this would put their company on the competitive map. As the concept started to crystallize, Emily was buoyed not just by the work, but by a sense of partnership. She and Jessica were more in sync than ever, making late-night tweaks to the deck, debating KPIs over cold takeout, dreaming of their company's name splashed across TechCrunch headlines. The challenge of bringing the idea to life was daunting, but for now, Emily felt invincible. Buoyed by ambition, grounded in trust, and for the first time in a while, genuinely optimistic about the future. It never once occurred to her that the force threatening this new future would come not from outside competitors, but from within the team, from the very person she trusted most. Betrayal. The atmosphere at the Helmge startup was changing. The subtle currents of camaraderie had given way to undercurrents that Emily Carter couldn't quite put her finger on. The days leading up to the executive presentation were a blur of final adjustments and rehearsed pitches. Yet something in Emily's gut felt off. She chalked it up to stress and the mounting pressure to prove herself. After all, this product upgrade, her brainchild, could vault their company ahead of the competition. She stayed focused, putting in late nights, refining slide decks, running simulations, and updating technical specs to perfection. But even as Emily buried herself in work, there were tiny clues surfacing in the workplace. Conversations that trailed off when she entered a room. Side glances exchanged between Jessica and a few of the engineers, and an unexplained coolness from the product manager she'd once trusted implicitly. In the startup world, secrecy was routine. Competitors lurked everywhere. But this silence felt different, more personal. Emily's relationship with her co-founder, Jessica, had always been the cornerstone of her confidence. Their synergy once felt unbreakable, a friendship forged through late-night campus sprints and kept alive by a shared sense of mission. Now, in quick flashes, Emily saw a different side of Jessica. brusque, distracted, sometimes even evasive. Jessica was more frequently absent from their late-night brainstorms, citing other obligations. She started holding private meetings to align strategy, but never seemed eager to debrief Emily afterward. One evening, Emily stayed late at the office, prepping for the big day. As midnight approached and the rest of the team had cleared out, she heard low voices drifting from the smaller conference room down the hall. Curious, she quietly approached and overheard Jessica's unmistakable voice. "Make sure everything's ready," Jessica was saying. "She can't catch us off guard." Emily's heart pounded. She took a breath, rationalizing that perhaps Jessica was just prepping the demo. She moved on, forcing the uneasy feeling aside. Friday dawned clear and electric. The entire startup buzzed with anticipation. Today's team meeting would be where the breakthrough was formally introduced ahead of the big public pitch. Emily arrived early, reviewing her notes and the carefully crafted presentation she'd poured weeks of thought into. As the clock ticked closer to 10 a.m., she noticed a flurry of Slack messages between Jessica and several core team members. Their phones blinked with notifications she couldn't see. The meeting began. Jessica opened with her trademark warm smile and a few clever icebreakers, effortlessly engaging the room. Emily, notebook in hand, waited for her signal to take the stage. Halfway through her introduction, though, Jessica's tone shifted. She clicked to a new slide. Emily's diagrams and sketches, but rearranged, accompanied by bullet points describing their revolutionary new platform features, predictive analytics, and user dashboards. Emily blinked, uncertain. Jessica was presenting Emily's entire innovation as if it were her own. At first, Emily sat frozen, expecting Jessica to acknowledge her contribution. Instead, Jessica pressed forward with expert poise, weaving Emily's technical insights into a crisp, concise narrative, the kind investors love. She spoke of late-night epiphanies and personal breakthroughs she'd had, citing details of development phases and competitor analysis, with no mention of Emily's sleepless hours or technical authorship. The team hung on Jessica's every word, nodding along, clearly swept up in the confident delivery. When Jessica announced, "I knew we needed to think outside the box, so I stayed up redesigning our data visualization," Emily felt as if she'd been slapped. Faces she'd trusted for months turned to Jessica in admiration. The marketing intern even cheered. Emily tried to interject, opening her mouth, yet Jessica, reading the shift in the room, smoothly cut her off with a preemptive, "We'll circle back later, Emily. For now, let's keep momentum." Humiliation surged. Emily's instinct was to protest, but the energy in the room had already shifted. The engineers and designers whom she had openly coached exchanged hesitant glances. Only the youngest developer, Jeremy, looked at Emily with concern. The meeting wrapped up with thunderous applause for Jessica and her extraordinary vision. Emily felt invisible, dismissed, and, worst of all, alone. In the aftermath, Emily approached Jessica privately. "We need to talk," she insisted, her voice barely masking anger. Jessica gave a thin, practiced smile. "Emily, you know how these things go. Investors want a single voice. I'm just making sure we have momentum. Don't take it personally. It's just business." Emily stared at her former friend in disbelief. "But it's not your idea," she said, voice trembling. Jessica's eyes flickered briefly, then hardened. "Whose name do you think is on all the company's documents? You're the technical lead, but investors want a strong, visible CEO. That's me. Don't make this harder than it already is." The implication was chilling. Emily realized Jessica had set the stage, presenting herself as the company's single face and quietly undermining Emily's position for weeks. Other revelations followed quickly. Emily discovered she had been removed from executive email chains, excluded from meetings with new investors, and locked out of files for security reasons. Some team members stopped replying to her messages. Others gave her tight, apologetic smiles and avoided eye contact in the kitchen. It quickly became clear that Jessica had been working behind the scenes, persuading product managers and engineers to align with her, sowing distrust about Emily's leadership style, and cherry-picking moments of tension to frame Emily as difficult or indecisive. Several marketing campaigns that Emily had outlined months before were suddenly announced as Jessica's roadmap in press releases and client calls. The startup was now firmly under Jessica's stamp. The loss was not just professional, but deeply personal. Emily scrolled through old texts and late-night Google Docs, reliving the partnership she'd once believed unbreakable. Now, even her closest allies seemed distant. Rumors swirled. Emily was burned out, too focused on minutiae, or unable to deliver under scale. Some former friends blocked her on LinkedIn or ducked her texts, unwilling to get caught in the drama. And yet, beneath the tidal wave of humiliation and betrayal, a stubborn clarity began to form. In the quiet of her now obsolete office, Emily let herself grieve, sitting at her desk after hours, knuckles white against the edge of the table. The city lights of Palo Alto flickered against the dusk as she realized just how thoroughly Jessica had orchestrated her fall. But the pain was transformative. Instead of submitting to defeat, a spark of resolve caught flame. Emily began quietly collecting every document, every version of her original work, every time-stamped note, and every email thread that verified her authorship and intentions. Instead of letting Jessica's betrayal destroy her, she set her jaw and began to envision a new path, a roadmap that did not rely on anyone else's approval, and that, one day, would see the truth brought to light. For the first time since arriving in Silicon Valley, Emily felt truly alone. But within that isolation, she sensed the birth of something harder, stronger, and more relentless than any heartbreak Jessica could inflict. The lowest point. The days that followed felt as if Emily Carter were drifting through a fog, hollowed out by disappointment and disbelief. She moved mechanically through her routines, the shock of Jessica's betrayal pulsing beneath each uneasy breath. In the company's open-plan office, where she'd once exchanged ideas and laughter, now she felt like a ghost, ignored, sidestepped, invisible to the very people who not long ago had looked to her for guidance and leadership. Emily cleared her belongings from her glass-walled office on a Friday evening, after most of the team had left for the weekend. Her hands shook as she packed the few tangible reminders of the whirlwind journey she and Jessica had begun together. A Stanford mug ringed with coffee stains, a crumpled Post-it with the first version of the company's name, a ragged notebook brimming with hand-drawn diagrams and brainstorms in her careful penmanship. Each object was a trigger, a reminder that her tireless nights at the whiteboard and bottomless faith in partnership had come to a devastating, abrupt end. Walking the deserted corridors after sunset, Emily's mind replayed the final confrontation with Jessica over and over. Each time, the words landed heavier. "Don't take it personally. It's just business." The office that had once buzzed with the euphoric promise of creation was now haunted by her exclusion. A place where, with a few subtle power plays and a single ruthless move, everything she had worked for had been erased. With nowhere to go and no one left to confide in, Emily wandered the neon-lit streets of downtown Palo Alto as dusk fell into night. She heard the muffled laughter of colleagues at happy hour spilling out of crowded bars. She spotted Jessica's familiar silhouette through the plate glass window of a trendy restaurant, flanked by board members, raising a toast to the future. The sight sent a stabbing ache through her chest. She quickened her pace, wishing she could shrink into the concrete, unseen. Emily found herself on a windswept pedestrian bridge overlooking the city lights. She clutched her jacket tightly in the chill, her mind spiraling in isolation. Was I blind? She wondered. Did I really mean so little? Enormous questions pressed down. All the confidence she'd built over years was buried under a cold, oily wave of doubt. Maybe the rumors were true, she thought. Maybe she was just too raw, too trusting, too much of an idealist to survive among sharks. The betrayal stirred up old insecurities from childhood. Growing up in the quiet sprawl of the Midwest, Emily had always played the role of reliable daughter, tireless student, the one who exceeded expectations but never quite felt she belonged. In Silicon Valley, she'd allowed herself, for the first time, to believe she was enough as herself. Now, that confidence was in tatters. On the bridge, she stared at her reflection in a puddle, ghostly in the glow of a streetlight. Tears welled up and spilled freely. For a long time that night, Emily simply allowed herself to break down, shoulders shaking in big, shuddering sobs that seemed to echo against the glass and steel city. She let go of the pressure to be the leader, the tireless doer, the relentless optimist she'd crafted for the world. For the first time in years, she allowed herself just to be lost. Over the weekend, Emily hid from the world in her tiny sublet, blinds drawn against the harsh sun. She ignored calls from her worried brother in Chicago and muted Team Slack channels she wasn't supposed to see anymore. Her inbox brimmed with notifications, meeting invites she was no longer included in, LinkedIn messages from recruiters, platitude-laced emails from HR. She deleted them all. Even her body protested, sleep elusive, appetite gone. At times, grief turned to rage, and she hurled the Stanford mug against her kitchen counter. Watching it shatter gave her a brief, hollow satisfaction. But when the anger faded, numbness returned. The fear that her experience would be dismissed or forgotten became overwhelming. Would anyone believe her story when Jessica was out there spinning the narrative? The risk of being labeled a troublemaker or sour graper seemed inevitable. That old double standard for women in power, where ambition was rebranded as arrogance and assertiveness as abrasiveness, felt more suffocating than ever. Yet underneath, something else was stirring. On Sunday night, unable to sleep, Emily scrolled through her phone, stumbling across a photo taken the first month of the company's founding. In it, she and Jessica are grinning, arms around each other, whiteboard behind them blazing with sticky notes. Emily stared at the image for a long moment, trying to reconcile the past with this present pain. It occurred to her that everything she had built, the long nights, the sleepless coding sprints, the vision for responsible, ethical technology, wasn't invalidated just because one person claimed the credit. Slowly, her thoughts turned. She remembered an offhand comment from a visiting female CTO months ago. "You will be underestimated. You will be sidelined. The real test is, will you let that become your legacy?" Emily sat up, wiped her eyes, and grabbed her battered notebook from her duffel bag. She began to make a list, painstaking, methodical, of everything she had contributed, every idea, every document, every late-night Slack exchange that traced the arc of the company's innovation. It was her way of reclaiming agency, however small, from the emotional wreckage. As dawn crept in, Emily finally left her apartment, walking to a nearby 24-hour diner for black coffee and greasy toast. She watched the other early risers, nurses finishing shifts, delivery drivers, a few students hunched over textbooks. Their quiet perseverance inspired something in her. She realized there was dignity in starting again, even from the deepest pit. This was not the end, just the lowest point, a hard reset. She called her brother in Chicago, voice still thick with exhaustion, but calm. She told him the whole story, omitting none of the pain but refusing to wallow in the bitterness. His simple advice lingered. You always said the system was broken, so be the one to change it. He encouraged her to reach out to mentors, to document everything, to look for allies who valued truth over politics. That evening, Emily wrote an email to the only former colleague she trusted, a quietly principled developer named Jeremy, who had looked at her with concern in the infamous meeting. She asked to meet for coffee and left it at that, setting no expectations. Then, closing her laptop, she looked out her window at the city glowing with second chances and hard lessons. Something had shifted. She wasn't sure what came next, but she knew with gut certainty that giving up wasn't an option. Emily Carter's name might have been smeared, her dreams hijacked, but her sense of purpose, the belief that she could create something meaningful and do it with integrity, remained. Rising from rock bottom, she resolved to build her case, reclaim her voice, and prove that one woman's lowest point could be the spark for a whole new beginning. The road back mornings in Palo Alto looked different now. After her fall, Emily Carter had become a stranger to the glittering startup corridors, the endless hum of pitch decks, the crowded happy hours where innovation was currency. Instead, her days began in the small rented kitchen of her sublet. The blue glow of her laptop illuminating pages of technical notes and stacks of legal printouts. If she was going to rebuild, it had to start here, amongst the ashes, with what she'd carried out in one battered cardboard box and a dozen overwritten backup drives. For the first time in years, Emily had space to reflect away from the relentless pace of the valley. She sat at her tiny kitchen table replaying every decision, considering every possible blind spot. How had trust so thoroughly betrayed her? What small signals had she swept aside? Each morning she wrestled with her anger and wounded pride, but as the silence stretched, something steadier began to take its place. A resolve to recover on her own terms. She built a timeline of the company's innovation from scratch, mapping every contribution she'd made, backed by time-stamped files, emails, and Slack logs. It was painstaking work, less elegant than coding, more excruciating than any all-nighter she'd ever pulled. But it gave her a quiet sense of control, a sense that the facts, at least, could not be rewritten. In these solitary days, Emily realized she needed perspective beyond her own crisis. She reached out to old professors at Stanford, updated her resume, and attended virtual seminars on data ethics, women in tech, and startup law. Alone, with nobody's expectations to fulfill but her own, she let curiosity and self-improvement fill her wide-open hours. She brushed up on skills neglected during her startup sprint: advanced machine learning, data security frameworks, financial modeling. For the first time, she wrote not to impress investors or teammates, but solely to push her own boundaries. But the most meaningful lessons didn't come from online courses or textbooks. One raw afternoon, she heard a news podcast interview with a founder who'd lost everything to a predatory acquisition, only to later rebuild, even stronger, by supporting others through similar setbacks. Something clicked. Strength, Emily realized, didn't just come from getting back what you lost, but from remaking yourself with less ego and broader vision. Motivated, Emily looked for honest work that would challenge her while freeing her from the toxic politics of her old world. She landed contract gigs as a freelance data consultant, often hustling for small clients or nonprofits no one in the valley would touch. The projects paid little, but sharpened her technical acumen and deepened her appreciation for the real-world impact of her work. She learned to listen to everyday users, the food bank staff struggling with logistics, the health clinic needing more secure data, the teachers desperate to better understand student progress. Solving their problems, with tight budgets and impatient deadlines, taught her more about product-market fit than any VC meeting ever had. Along the way, she slowly rebuilt her network, not through flashy introductions, but through word of mouth and quiet competence. Every week brought new online meetings. She took careful notes and followed up with gratitude, asking for candid feedback. She reconnected with mentors and former classmates, not shying away from the story of her downfall, but using it to ask bolder questions. How do you protect yourself in a business partnership? How do you lead with principle when so many value only the outcome? Many responded with hard-learned advice, some with offers of help, and a few with stories of their own betrayals and recoveries. One of her earliest supporters surprised her most. Jeremy, the junior developer who'd once looked at her with silent sympathy across a tense conference table, responded immediately to her coffee invitation. Over mismatched mugs in a sunlit backyard, Jeremy confessed he'd left the startup too, disillusioned by the direction it had taken under Jessica's leadership. "It wasn't the place we built anymore," he said. "People felt it, but no one wanted to go against the winners." Buoyed by Jeremy's loyalty, Emily began to gather other former colleagues who valued collaboration and integrity over showmanship. Over evenings of pizza and whiteboard sketches, they discussed new ideas, sometimes technical, sometimes just human. How to build a feedback culture that silenced nobody. How to enshrine credit sharing and transparency in a company's DNA from the very first day. These small gatherings became an unofficial recovery circle, each person contributing lessons from past mistakes and offering support for one another's freelance ventures. Emily also sought legal guidance, quietly compiling the evidence she'd amassed, her notebooks, emails, code commit history. She consulted with a pro bono attorney specializing in startup disputes. The process was slow, frustrating, and full of professional risks, but for Emily, it was about more than just restoring her good name. It was about principle and about warning others who stood where she once had, brimming with vision, but unprepared for how ruthless the landscape could be. Through all these changes, Emily's perspective shifted. She no longer saw herself just as the victim of Jessica's betrayal, or even solely as a wronged founder. Instead, she felt ownership of her learning, her resilience, and her ability to move forward despite heartbreak. Each misstep, each lesson was hers to keep. In coaching calls with other female founders, Emily found that listening and sharing her hard-won wisdom helped heal some of her own wounds. "This could happen to anyone," she'd say, "and it doesn't get to define you unless you let it." By early spring, a year after her original company's founding, Emily felt a new confidence underpinning her ambitions. She no longer needed validation from click-chasing media or investors hungry for the next unicorn. She had shaped something more lasting, a reputation for honesty, skill, and quiet leadership. With a modest bank account and no buzzworthy product, yet, Emily felt richer in clarity than she'd ever been. But the past would not stay hidden for long. A prominent tech conference, one Emily and Jessica had always dreamed of attending as speakers, announced its opening for pitches and panelists on responsible innovation. Jeremy urged Emily to submit a session proposal, featuring not just technical breakthroughs, but the full, messy story of building ethically from the ground up. At first, Emily hesitated, haunted by the ghosts of public humiliation. But then she thought of the new friends and colleagues she'd found on the road back, people who'd thrived not in spite of their setbacks, but because of the character forged during hard times. She spent a long night drafting her proposal, blending technical detail with transparency about her journey. For the first time, her lowest point was not the ending, but the strongest argument for a new beginning. As she hit submit, Emily Carter felt the weight of shame lighten, replaced at last with hope. The turning point, the big presentation. The day of the conference broke clear and sharp, the kind of morning that seemed to vibrate with possibility. As Emily Carter walked the tree-lined streets leading to the downtown convention center, her heart thundered with anticipation and anxiety. The annual tech summit was Silicon Valley's grand stage. Venture capitalists, journalists, founders, and talent scouts all mingled in its bustling halls. For years, Emily had imagined appearing here as a celebrated innovator, side by side with Jessica, their company's logo gleaming above them both. Now, the dream was half fulfilled and half a nightmare. Inside, the sense of spectacle was immediate. Bright banners hung from soaring ceilings, logos of industry giants jostling for space beside hungry new startups. Hackathon winners demoed prototypes at crowded booths. Investors' laughter rippled across the polished floor. Emily passed through security, conference badge swinging around her neck. Emily Carter, data ethics panelist. The words felt both surreal and hard-won. She found herself a quiet corner, laptop open and hands trembling slightly as she reviewed her slides one more time. Each graphic was not just data, it was evidence. She'd included timestamps, original diagrams with her handwriting, email screenshots, version histories, and annotated user flows, the invisible fingerprints of months spent building, dreaming, and ultimately fighting for credit. Her lawyer's voice echoed in her head. Speak only your truth. Don't attack. Let the facts speak for themselves. The keynote kicked off with obligatory celebration of entrepreneurship, disruption, and grit. Panel after panel paraded across the stage, each founder rehearsing some version of the same myth. Success as a solo journey. Emily, waiting in the wings with the other panelists, felt her nerves spike as she glimpsed Jessica in the audience. Her former friend's hair and suit were perfect as always, her presence magnetic. Jessica was surrounded by newer team members, those who'd once worked long nights with Emily as their lead, now laughing at Jessica's jokes. Emily forced herself not to look away. She reminded herself why she was here, not just for vindication or revenge, but for everyone who'd ever been erased, talked over, or sidelined in the name of convenience. She glanced at her phone. A message from Jeremy, simple and steady. You've already won by telling the truth. Proud of you. Another buzzed in from her brother. You got this. The moderator's microphone crackled. Next up, our final session of the morning. Building ethically, innovation with accountability. Please welcome Emily Carter. Applause rolled through the ballroom and she stepped out, the stage lights momentarily blinding. Emily stood before a sea of faces. Investors, founders, former colleagues, reporters live tweeting every word. She let her hands settle on the podium, forced herself to steady her breathing, and began. I want to tell a different kind of story, she said, voice clear, surprising herself. Not one about unicorn valuations or hypergrowth, but about what it costs and what it means to stay true to your values when nobody else wants you to. She traced the company's beginnings, the shared vision, late nights at the whiteboard, the first tentative product. She didn't use Jessica's name. There was no need. Instead, she described the moment of breakthrough, the countless small decisions that shaped the product's ethical backbone, the hope that they might upend the common wisdom by caring more about trust than hype. Then she paused, clicking to a slide labeled Authorship. She showed a digital timeline, file creation dates, initial architecture drawings, Slack exchanges, annotated code commits. Ideas don't arise in a vacuum, Emily said. They are nurtured, refined, and if we are honest, dependent on the people willing to do the work behind the scenes. She presented her evidence candidly, not as a weapon, but as a ledger. This is not about one person or one company. It's about a culture that too often rewards visibility over substance and lets power rewrite history. The audience was utterly silent, the only sound the whir of air conditioning and an occasional camera shutter. Emily went further, drawing parallels between her own story and those of others, women and minorities whose contributions had been minimized or erased. She named mentors who'd helped her stand back up, and colleagues like Jeremy who'd walked away rather than compromise on integrity. Her message was clear. Leadership wasn't about taking credit. It was about lifting others, about transparency, about defending what couldn't defend itself. As she neared her conclusion, Emily's voice softened. If I have one lesson to share, it's this. Your lowest point is not the end of your story. Sometimes, it's the first time you see your own true strength. The world may doubt you. Your closest allies may turn. But you alone decide what kind of legacy you leave, win or lose. Her closing slide simply read, "Truth is resilient." The room erupted in applause, far louder and more sustained than Emily had imagined possible. She blinked back sudden tears, of relief, of exhaustion, of vindication. The impact was immediate. Reporters clustered around her after she stepped down, asking for comments and clarifications. Several investors, not the flashy ones who sought headlines, but seasoned partners with a reputation for honest inquiry, introduced themselves and offered their cards. More important to her, though, were the quiet handshakes from fellow founders, the nods of respect from women who whispered thanks as they passed. Jessica, for her part, remained near the back of the room. Her face was unreadable. When Emily met her gaze, there was no triumph or anger, only a kind of sad acknowledgement, a silent recognition that the truth had finally found its audience. That afternoon, social media erupted. Clips of Emily's presentation were shared across LinkedIn and Twitter, debated in private Slack channels, praised in newsletters focused on ethical tech. Some praised Emily as a new kind of leader. Others speculated about internal turmoil at the company. The next morning, her inbox overflowed with new opportunities and old allies reaching out, some apologizing for having doubted her, others eager to collaborate. For the first time since her fall, Emily felt seen, not just as a brilliant technician or visionary, but as a person whose story could help others navigate the minefields of ambition and betrayal. She knew that her journey wasn't over, that pushback and skepticism lay ahead, and that healing from what had been lost would take time. Yet at that moment, as the sun set behind the glass towers of Palo Alto, Emily let herself hope for something she hadn't dared in months. Not just redemption, but the promise of real, lasting impact. Jessica's downfall and awakening. In the days following Emily's powerful conference presentation, the startup world was abuzz with speculation and delayed outrage. News of Emily's story, her vision, her erasure, her courage, spread faster than any product launch. As her words reached wider audiences, they became something more than personal vindication, a powerful warning about ethics and leadership in Silicon Valley's cutthroat terrain. Jessica Miller, once the radiant face of their company and unchallenged in her authority, felt the ground abruptly shift beneath her feet. For years, she had managed to control the narrative, winning over investors with her polished facade, keeping the team focused on growth, and, when necessary, pushing difficult conversations out of sight. Now, however, control was slipping away, not with a dramatic explosion, but in a steady, unstoppable unraveling. It began with an uncertain silence from the executive team. In the Monday leadership call that followed Emily's talk, Jessica noticed cameras turned off, voices subdued. Where there had once been eager compliance, she now heard skepticism in their questions. Can you clarify the timeline of product development? Who contributed to the new algorithms? Were all founding team members appropriately credited in our filings? Jessica brushed off the tension at first, retreating to her habit of confident explanations and busy schedules. But a new chill lingered in the office. The board, spurred by concern for reputation and legal exposure, requested a full internal review of all design documents, communications, and pitch materials from the previous year. The company's general counsel, someone Jessica had always considered an ally, now emailed to request access to private Slack channels and old email threads. Suddenly, doors that had always been open to Jessica were closed. Meetings were held without her, and whispers trailed her in hallway conversations. The first true blow came when a journalist published a thorough exposé, detailing not only Emily's contributions but also the subtle mechanisms by which she had been written out of company lore. Anonymous sources, once loyal engineers, even a member of the early marketing team, spoke up, confirming the quiet campaign that had shifted credit and leadership, all while Jessica had steered the ship. The article was clear, fair, and damning. Social media turned almost overnight. Public opinion wavered from admiration to suspicion. LinkedIn connections evaporated. A prominent female venture capitalist posted, "Let this be a lesson. True leadership is about sharing the stage, not stealing it." Comments poured in, many angry, some supportive, some heartbreakingly disappointed. Still, Jessica clung to the routines that had once steadied her. She threw herself into work, drafting new investor updates and rallying what remained of her loyal team. She responded to board queries with legalistic precision, always returning to growth metrics and user acquisition numbers. But it was like pouring water into a sinking boat. The leaks were everywhere. The final reckoning unfolded at a tense board meeting 2 weeks after Emily's presentation. Jessica sat at the polished end of a long table, the city skyline glittering. Outside, her reflection doubled in the glass. Across from her, board members reviewed the results of the internal review. The chair cleared her throat. "Jessica, these findings confirm significant omissions in credit allocation, both internally and externally. In light of this breach of trust, your actions are irreconcilable with the leadership values we hold." Jessica's heart pounded. She tried to defend herself, arguing that founders make difficult choices, that presentation and cohesion sometimes demanded a unified voice. "Everything I did was for the company," she insisted, voice tight. But the responses, cold, flat, made it clear the argument was lost. The board voted to remove her as CEO. Effective immediately, legal counsel would manage the transition of her shares and her exit. She was out. The news broke on tech sites within the hour. Once, Jessica's name had been synonymous with fresh leadership and fierce ambition. Now it carried an asterisk. Discredited, ousted, cautionary tale. Allies receded. Recruitment emails stopped. Even friends she'd thought above the fray stopped returning her texts. The humiliation was crushing, but the silence afterward, days and then weeks of it, was worse. Jessica walked through her apartment in a daze, still dressed as if for meetings she would never attend. The energy and assertiveness that had made her a force in the company now turned inward, fueling restlessness and regret. She found herself returning to old emails, searching for the moment when partnership had soured into rivalry. At first, Jessica justified her actions. "I only took the lead because Emily froze in big rooms. I protected the company." But as she read further, long-forgotten Slack exchanges, messages from Emily late at night, notes of gratitude in the margins of dense technical documents, her own role became harder to disguise. Sleep eluded her. She replayed every decision and maneuver, every moment she'd chosen her own advancement over honesty. The face she presented to the world, the unstoppable woman in tech, the charismatic closer, was cracked and flickering. The memories that hurt most weren't the accolades lost, but the early days. Pizza nights in a cramped apartment, Emily laughing at Jessica's dumb jokes, sticky notes plastered across bare walls during the company's first spring. At her lowest, Jessica retreated into isolation. She ignored phone calls and muted social feeds, but slowly, something more honest began to take hold. The anger at unfairness gave way to acknowledgement, first grudging, then gut-wrenching. She'd betrayed not only Emily, but also her own better instincts, the firebrand ambition that was meant to lift others, not silence them. One morning, Jessica made herself go outside, walking the quiet streets with no destination. She passed university students in animated debate, people with dreams still ahead of them. The world, she realized, was moving on, implacable, indifferent to her fall. She sat on a bench and for the first time didn't try to shake the shame. She let herself feel it fully. Reflecting on her journey, Jessica reached out to her former mentor, a tough, retired executive known for blunt advice. Their conversation was short but bracing. "You can be bitter or you can get real," the mentor said. "Some stories end. If you're lucky, you change before you get another shot." Determined not to waste the lesson, Jessica began reaching out quietly, humbly, to people she'd wronged or pushed aside. She sent a terse apology to Emily, not expecting forgiveness, but needing her to know. "You deserved better. I lost my way." She contacted the engineers she'd manipulated, admitting where she'd fallen short, and volunteered at a small boot camp for underrepresented founders, sharing not just her victories, but the painful consequences of her choices. The world didn't forget overnight, and Jessica's own healing came in slow, uneven steps. But she found moments of grace in the honest work of rebuilding, letting her mistakes shape a more transparent, collaborative version of herself. She realized too late that legacy, in business and in life, was measured not just by credits and headlines, but by integrity in the hardest moments. Jessica's fall was public and irreversible. But her awakening, though quieter, was real. In losing everything she thought she'd wanted, she discovered how much more she still had to learn. Not about winning, but about becoming someone worth following, even when no one was left to watch. Restoring honor and rising above. The ripple effect from Emily's conference presentation lingered in Palo Alto long after the adrenaline of applause had faded. In the days that followed, her inbox flooded with messages, a wave of old classmates, former colleagues, and total strangers reaching out. Some sent congratulations, others apologies, and many offered their own stories about being sidelined, overlooked, or written out of their own ventures. To Emily, each note was a reminder that her battle had never been just her own. For the first time, the public narrative belonged to her. News outlets, even beyond Silicon Valley, picked up her journey. A founder ousted and erased by her closest friend, only to return stronger, credentials and voice intact. Emily granted a handful of respectful interviews, emphasizing the importance of transparency, ethical credit, and the culture of silence that too often punishes those who speak out. She refused to let the story devolve into tabloid-style drama. "It's not about revenge," she insisted more than once. "It's about building something better, together." Ironically, the very thing that had threatened to destroy her reputation became the foundation of her resurgence. Investors who reached out to her were people who valued careful stewardship over flash and spectacle. Many were women and people of color with their own scars from fighting uphill battles in a male-dominated world. Rather than the table-pounding, win-at-all-costs VCs she'd learned to politely sidestep, these backers were quietly powerful, interested in integrity, sustainability, and purpose before profit. With newfound support, Emily set about assembling her team not from the loudest resumes, but from those who had shown her real loyalty and shared values. Jeremy, her steadfast friend, was the first to join the nascent venture, eager to create a workplace culture where nobody would be left in the shadows. Soon, a patchwork of familiar faces and promising new talent gathered around her. Their backgrounds were diverse. No single university or hometown dominated their meetings, but their common ground was mutual respect and belief in second chances. Unlike her previous startup's high-octane launch, Emily's new company grew patiently, brick by brick. Every team meeting, every line of code, every PR statement was shaped by the lessons of her past. Credit was scrupulously documented and attributed. Disagreements were seen as a feature, not a flaw. Even on small projects, junior developers found their names next to veterans in press releases and storyboards. The culture was transparent to the point of discomfort at first, but as weeks turned to months, the energy shifted. Loyalty was built not on fear, but on trust. As word spread about this culture of accountability, more overlooked talents sought Emily out. Women who had survived their own betrayals, immigrant engineers whose ideas were once dismissed, disabled developers denied a seat at previous tables, all found a space and a sympathetic ear in Emily's fledgling company. Between work and life, the line blurred. Weekend hackathons turned into potlucks. Difficult decisions were debated over ramen instead of in stuffy boardrooms. Emily's professional resurrection, however, was only half the journey. Public redemption brought its own mix of relief and challenge. Her LinkedIn profile, once deserted, now brimmed with supportive comments and invitations. But each media cycle revived old rumors, and with every new feature, skeptics popped up demanding, "Why didn't you fight harder before?" Or, "How do we know it won't happen again?" For every victory, it seemed, there was another test. Yet this time, Emily was equipped with something she'd never truly had: the confidence that comes from losing everything and finding not just survival, but a deeper version of herself. The humbling days of freelancing for nonprofits, the late-night anxiety attacks, the low points where her only company was black coffee and blinking Slack notifications, all became fuel. Instead of shrinking from doubts, she began speaking openly about the constant work of healing and how no title or headline could ever guarantee security. "Resilience isn't something you're born with," she told a panel of young founders. "It's something you build, often while you're still bleeding." The company's first product launch was unassuming, a toolbox for small organizations to easily audit data privacy, built with empathy for real users. Instead of big fanfare, the team released it quietly, then worked closely with each early adopter, listening humbly to criticism and praise alike. Success came slowly but steadily, thanks to word of mouth and genuine testimonials instead of crafted sound bites. More than the sales numbers, what thrilled Emily was an email from a nonprofit director. "We feel heard. We feel seen." As Emily's standing in the community grew, so too did her opportunities to pay it forward. She started mentoring young women technologists, holding monthly Q&A sessions over coffee, open to anyone who wanted advice. No getting past a gatekeeper required. She joined panels on founder ethics and workplace inclusion, and was asked to keynote a conference dedicated to second acts in leadership. Each appearance felt less like a victory lap and more like a stitch in the slow mending of Silicon Valley's cultural fabric. Jessica's figure loomed on the margins, an occasional reminder that the story of betrayal never really ended, only evolved. Although Jessica had reached out with a cautious apology, Emily had not rushed to forgive, nor to forget. Instead, she focused on using her scars as warnings and guideposts, living proof that even the most painful wound can be integrated, if not erased. But perhaps the most surprising outcome was how her example emboldened others. Old allies who had distanced themselves in the aftermath of her ousting now returned, sometimes to apologize, sometimes for advice, and sometimes simply to talk about the pressures of their own positions. Even former skeptics admitted their admiration for her steady, principled approach. In private, more than one board member from her former company thanked her for forcing overdue conversations about leadership and fairness. By late spring, Emily no longer felt driven by the need for vindication or headlines. She found contentment in small victories: a team member's spontaneous thank you, a solved technical snag, an honest conversation about burnout. For the first time in years, she slept soundly, trusting that her life was not at the mercy of someone else's ambition. Looking back, Emily saw her restored honor not as a destination, but as a living, daily practice. Rising above meant more than rebounding from disgrace. It meant lifting others, being transparent in every action, and embracing vulnerability alongside excellence. Her company was still young, and her journey was ongoing, but she knew one thing with certainty. True legacy is defined not by winning, but by how you uplift and include when nobody's watching. A final reflection lingered as she headed home after another productive day. There is no final victory, only the quiet, steady work of building something better, even when you think no one else is looking. Lessons and new beginnings. On a crisp summer morning, sunlight filtering through the gauzy curtains of her modest apartment, Emily Carter sat quietly at her desk, a fresh notebook open before her. It was a rare pause between calls and code, but she'd learned that these quiet moments were essential, both for recovery and for honoring the journey she'd taken. The noise of the outside world faded, replaced by the steady tap of her pen as she began to chronicle the lessons she'd torn from heartbreak, betrayal, and hard-won triumph. The first lesson was about trust. Hard to earn, easy to lose, and never, ever to be given blindly. For months after Jessica's betrayal, Emily replayed every interaction, every decision, trying to pinpoint the exact moment the partnership began to unravel. What she realized, finally, was that trust in business is neither static nor singular. It's a living thing, a current that must be checked, tested, and reestablished at every step, through both words and actions. It wasn't cynicism she'd learned, but vigilance. To lead well, you had to pay attention to the tone of your team, to the subtleties of communication, and the faintest hints of resentment or ambition gone astray. Her second lesson came from failure itself. In Silicon Valley, the mythology of the fail fast mantra dripped from the walls of every incubator and seed fund. But what nobody explained was how failure, when it arrived not as a technical setback or market shift, but as a gutting act of betrayal, could puncture every layer of self-confidence. Emily discovered that persistence wasn't about shaking off setbacks with brute optimism. Sometimes it meant letting go, grieving, admitting pain, even leaning on others for support, before the ground could settle enough to try again. True grit, she realized, was quiet and, crucially, compassionate, even toward herself. Community was the next lesson, one Emily could never have anticipated in her loneliest nights. At her lowest, she had felt alone in a city obsessed with networking, yet starved for authentic connection. Yet as her story spread, support arrived from unlikely corners: seasoned founders, young coders, social workers, and nonprofit leaders. She learned how real strength comes from interdependence, not individual heroics. When she opened her new startup's doors to everyone who'd ever been left out, she discovered innovation itself was richer, messier, and more enduring than anything built in an echo chamber. Another lesson wove through the patterns of her new leadership: transparency. She had once assumed that credit would naturally stick to those who did the work, that merit would, over time, become self-evident. After seeing how easily a narrative could be shaped, erased, or twisted behind closed doors, Emily knew better. Now, every project at her company began with documentation, honest conversations about goals and ownership, and the hard work of surfacing disagreements early. Transparency isn't a sign of distrust, she'd tell her team now. It's the foundation that lets us do daring things together, knowing no one will be left behind. Reflection on ambition brought her to another key insight. For years, Emily viewed ambition as a torch, one to be carried high through each sprint, product launch, and investor pitch. But unchecked, ambition had nearly destroyed what mattered most. Watching Jessica's downfall forced Emily to confront the shadow side of chasing glory, the temptation to cut corners, silence dissent, and seek affirmation at any cost. In her second act, Emily reframed ambition as a tool in service to community and mission, not an end in itself. The most lasting victories, she saw, came from uplifting others along the way. As summer deepened, Emily felt a restlessness she recognized not as unease, but as readiness for something new. One crisp afternoon, during a panel for emerging female entrepreneurs, a question from a nervous college student struck a chord. How do you know when it's time to let go of the past and actually start over? Emily smiled, recalling the countless times she'd asked herself the same thing. You don't ever fully let go, she replied. But one day, you wake up with more curiosity about what comes next than fear about what you lost. And then you take the next step, even if it's small. With her company running smoothly, Emily carved out regular time to mentor young founders, particularly women and underrepresented minorities who so often slipped through the valley's cracks. She refused to hide her scars, using them to spark honest discussions about power, partnership, and ethical leadership. Instead of simply giving advice, Emily listened to stories of discrimination, of ideas written off as impossible, of dreams held together by hope and little else. Over coffee and whiteboards, she grew into her new role as not just a builder of products, but a cultivator of talent and courage. Internally, Emily's team began to grow in ways that surprised her. Junior engineers pitched new features without fear. A designer with a stutter found her voice in user interviews. A marketing intern launched a campaign about data transparency that quickly gained national attention. Each victory, however small, was celebrated. Each mistake, when inevitably made, became a teaching moment, never a scapegoating session. This, Emily thought, was the real prize, a workplace where people left each day stronger than they arrived. The sense of a new beginning permeated other areas of her life, too. Emily reconnected with her family in Chicago, no longer defined by the pressure to make it in Silicon Valley, but simply as a daughter, a sister, and a friend. She traveled, sometimes to speak, sometimes just to wander, rediscovering the joy of moving without urgency. Late, on a Sunday, as the city lights began to flicker and her partner set a kettle to boil in the kitchen, Emily closed her latest notebook and gazed out at the Palo Alto skyline. She wasn't certain what shape the future would take, or what new storms would come. But she was sure of the hard-earned wisdom she carried. That integrity is a daily practice, that leadership is service, and that no dream was worth abandoning her true self. Emily allowed herself to hope, not for headlines or applause, but for a legacy measured in the confidence she inspired and the doors she helped others unlock. The valley would move on, always hungry for the next unicorn or overnight sensation. Emily Carter, though, had learned to find meaning, not in the race, but in the steady stride, the hand outstretched behind her, and the communities forged in both success and failure. And so, as dawn stretched over the horizon, the start of another day and perhaps another chapter, Emily picked up her pen, wrote a single word at the top of a fresh page, and stepped forward. It was, as all beginnings should be, both ordinary and extraordinary, full of lessons remembered and possibilities still to come.